Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Summers, and I'm the director of Peaslee Neighborhood Center. We are, for those of you who may not know us, we are a community hub and an education center that's been doing community work in the city for over 36 years. I'm joined today by Joelle Newman and Jen Ahrens, educators and organizers at Peaslee, and Bonnie Newmeyer, a co-founder of Peaslee. Collectively, we hold over 90 years of experience and expertise in community development work in the city of Cincinnati. At this critical moment, city residents are demanding change, real change, and to tackle systemic racism and inequity in our city. We have come here with you today because we've spent several years working on a tool that we call the Equitable Development Rubric and a policy framework to accompany that. This tool and a framework have great relevance to the city's current conversations on development policy, especially to the balanced development legislation that's been put forth by Councilmember Landsman at your previous committee meeting and that was just talked about. We'd like to use this time to first share a summary of our deep community-based and development work that we've done thus far, and then to demonstrate the need for extensive changes and an overhaul to this legislation. Our framework for the Equitable Development Rubric is at its core an inclusionary housing policy. It just has some additional layers to it. The concept of inclusionary housing is simple. You set requirements so that private developments make a contribution to affordable housing, but it takes deep work to get the details right. Here are the major 5 steps that we see as crucial to this process and that we've been undergoing as a community for a long period of time. And we'll use them to explain that work to you that we've done thus far.
Step 1 is to diagnose the local problem and needs. Our choice to go down this specific policy path is informed by loads of local data and recommendations gleaned from many Cincinnati-focused studies, including assessments from the Urban League, LISC, Community Building Institute, and All In Cincinnati. All of this also builds on decades of resident experience and community engagement. Our rubric addresses Cincinnati's glaring racial and economic inequity by using metrics specific to where the local need is, bringing benefits to our Black communities, communities of color, and those at the bottom of the economic ladder. It also tackles our problems with transparency and community engagement by using a detailed questionnaire to make sure critical information is widely available and streamlining an engagement process for Cincinnati's community councils. Step 2 is study policies nationwide. There are 900 programs across the US that require affordable housing in exchange for the subsidies Cincinnati is currently already giving out freely. Some programs are much better than others, and our robust research has allowed us to see what approaches have worked best in other cities. The rubric scoring system incorporates key lessons learned by making requirements firm but flexible and adjusting to the different realities across our city's neighborhoods. It also focuses on the impact of public subsidies and incentives on proposed projects. Step 3 is creating a local framework. The rubric is designed to be attached to our public subsidies, which are bigger and more freely used than in the vast majority of other major cities. It also recognizes the other side of the affordable housing coin, living wage jobs for folks who currently have low incomes. Our framework allows an opt-out of affordable units only if comparable contribution is made in this area. Our framework sets simple and better standards for community engagement and the handling of community assets. It also offers many possibilities for extra credit and uses a carefully weighted system to holistically evaluate a project on its contribution to equity. Step 4 is re-engage community in vetting the approach. The rubric has been co-created and shaped by local experts, public input sessions, residents and community councils, university classrooms, and public discussion over several years. It is officially endorsed and being utilized by community councils, coalition groups, and a wide array of organizations working toward greater equity in Cincinnati. Step 5 and the final step is testing feasibility with good data and then adjusting accordingly. Grounded Solutions Network is the gold standard national organization for analysis on these policies. They are often hired as consultants to help cities with this work. They created the Inclusionary Housing Calculator for this exact purpose. We have been using this tool along with detailed assessments of similar cities like Detroit and Pittsburgh to evaluate the rubric, and the results are very encouraging. Better information is needed to continue to test and tweak, but with the rubric, we have a solid foundation.
We are excited that there is energy in this moment among city council members to make progress in this area. Being years into this work, we are also keenly aware of what is helpful and unhelpful in moving forward. We see a great need for legislation that, 1, furthers better information gathering, 2, equips the city for better assessment, and 3, sets policy requirements. In your last committee meeting, it was acknowledged that the council is not yet ready to agree on policy requirements, and indeed none of the recent motions from council members articulate the specifics of such requirements, though we commend Councilmember Carney's acknowledgement that requirements are needed. We appreciate Councilmember Landsman's effort to get us closer to assessment, but the balanced development scorecard falls far short. It does not prioritize equity, it does not discern between very important differences in values of benefits, and it does not meaningfully evaluate projects, either quantitatively or qualitatively. For the record, the rubric has just as many qualitative measures in it as quantitative. The fact that it uses a numerical scoring system does not mean that it reduces projects to numbers-only outcomes. We appreciate Councilmember Landsman's earnest hope that passing something now might lead to good assessment later. This is why we are advocating that this legislation be adapted to refocus on information gathering, an outcome that other council members seemed to hope for in your last meeting. This shift would require that the tool incorporate added detail and specificity. We recognize that DCED does not want projects to be set up for a specific standards-based judgment without a guiding policy from council. So we propose that you table the assessment piece for now and simply collect detailed, relevant information on each project to establish a body of data that will inform the assessment and policy work that lies ahead. For this purpose, we have shared an adapted version of our developer questionnaire. The document has been emailed to every council member, and we ask that its full content be included in whatever information gathering tool you approve. We will offer briefly a few examples here of the value and necessity of this information. For very good reasons, the demand for greater transparency in the city's development dealings is coming from nearly every corner of Cincinnati. Answering this call needs to begin with providing clarity in how our public resources support private development. On this front, the legislation as proposed offers only a yes or no question on whether city assistance exceeds $3 million. Indeed, the proposed legislation specifies that only projects with costs exceeding $5 million and city assistance exceeding $3 million would even be subject to evaluation. This seems an extraordinarily high and arbitrary threshold to set for the simple act of evaluating equity and contribution to the public good. This question of evaluation aside, though, we argue that in the spirit of transparency, information should be gathered and made accessible for all public subsidies used in development. We ask that you instead use the table from our questionnaire that provides a breakdown of all subsidies at play and their dollar values to the specific project at hand. For residential projects, on-site affordable units are the single most valuable contribution to equity. The public need for affordable units is critical and specific to the lowest income levels. Good inclusionary housing policy is impossible without data that helps us understand how private projects align with these income levels. In place of the proposed legislation's measure that lumps every income level together, We ask that you use our questionnaires tables that make it easy for developers to sort their units into the different levels based on listed monthly cost ranges with a simple summary of the breakdown to follow. Though there is more overlap with our questionnaire and the proposed legislation on jobs and wages, we similarly ask that you include our specifics in the final tool. There already exists a solid foundation of standards for good wages and local entry jobs in the building trades. It is crucial that we incorporate these standards without pitting them against new ones. Our questionnaire is careful to clarify if standards apply during construction or post-construction. We also draw upon a federal standard that is critical for equity, a way for living wage jobs to prioritize the hiring of local folks who are currently not paid enough to live in our city. It is possible to truly consider how job creation might bring the same value as affordable housing, and these specific questions are necessary to do that. We'd like to reiterate that we remain committed to realizing policy requirements for inclusionary housing. Our city is not livable for tens of thousands of working class people. Cincinnatians deserve a city government that uses every tool in its toolbox to meet the basic human needs of living wage jobs and decent, secure housing. Any growth strategies for our city that remain unhinged from these goals will only continue to keep our city segregated, our children in poverty, and our future unsustainable and unjust. City Council's commitment to transparency in development has never been more important, and gathering this information is an easy and necessary step to better governance. We also want to stress that transparency requires that city officials be precise in defining their actions and reflecting the impact of those actions on the public. There is widespread public demand for actual change in the way development projects are assessed and granted public subsidies. The current proposed legislation does not meet this demand. As we've said, this does not mean it cannot offer something valuable, but clarity is necessary. Along with our ask for adaptations is an ask that the legislation be properly named, as Councilmember Landsman just spoke about, and represented to the general public. If the best we can do right now is a survey and not a scorecard, let's call it a survey and not a scorecard. And let's make it a really good survey that sets us up for better work going forward. We at Peaslee hope to be meaningful collaborators in this work. Our communities depend on it. We'd like to thank you for allowing us the time to share with you today, and we appreciate your consideration of our very specific asks.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, and I appreciate your making your presentation very cogently and within the 15 minutes that we talked about. Mr. Landsman?
Yeah, just real quick, I just want to say thanks to everyone at Peaslee for their incredible work over the years, pulling all of this together. It's a ton of research. It's based, as they talked, on a lot of experience and data. And I would just encourage everyone to look through both the rubric, the Peaslee rubric, but also the developer questionnaire. And since we have a couple weeks, and if there are things that pop up, please let's bring those to the conversation next week. I do think that part of what we are seeing is real momentum around these issues, which is great. And I think the priorities rubric, the balanced development priorities rubric, is a step in the right direction. Though I will say it's one step. I think it's going to be up to us to take the next step, and I think working with Peaslee and others is going to be very important. I also, we're going to have this conversation, but on affordable housing, the ability to put in money is going to be so important for us, and I know that my colleagues know that, and we really do have to get to a place where we have an additional, $200 million a year, which is a lot of money. But when you think about the need, and Jen is right, it's for tens of thousands of people. We're not where we need to be in terms of housing. It's a huge outage, and it's not just new units. It's protecting, maintaining existing units, improving the conditions of those existing units, rent subsidies, eviction prevention support, well beyond what we're doing today. That has to be front and center, as we move forward. I know we're doing a whole host of changes, but ultimately that is going to be something we're going to have to wrestle to the ground.
All right, any other questions or comments? So,
Mr. Chair?
Mr.
Chair, if
Gooden.
I may.
Yes.
Yes, sir, thank you. First, I do want to thank, the folks from Peaslee Center for taking the time and continuing to work with us on this. I mean, they've spent some time with me and educated me on some of their points of view. I appreciate it. I know I particularly appreciate you meeting with me, given my grumpy disposition at times, in part due to on some of these issues. And I do want to thank Councilmember Landsman for continuing to drive this. I mean, I still have, some questions, but I can say this, that the for-profit developers and market rate developers that I hear from, what they primarily want is certainty and predictability in these situations. I mean, I think they would still, take some issue with some of the requirements, but we need to get to a place where everybody who is coming into the city with market rate development or predominantly market rate development proposals knows where they're headed. And I think it's that uncertainty that has led to a lot of the contacts with the administration and council that folks feel are inappropriate or that lead to some of the problems. So I think that is, I think that to the extent we could work this process to get to a place where there is more certainty, that I'm all for. Some of the specifics I reserve the right to disagree with going forward, but I do think that part of it's great. In terms of transparency, I hear you 100%, and we do have some new proposals that some other council members are working on, myself included, that may address that piece in a more separate way, particularly around the campaign finance piece, and that'll be coming along here pretty soon. And Mr. Landsman, I wanted to talk to you about that offline as well, to show you some proposed language there in advance of the next meeting. And I guess thirdly, I do want to find some way to I guess, sort of call out the work that we're doing in this new affordable housing subcommittee. We've only met once, but we're meeting every other Tuesday at noon. The focus there is sort of on the big ticket piece. And I know what I've talked a lot, with this group and other activists for funding the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is, to me, a paramount concern if we're really going to tackle this issue. And I mean, dealing with the developer piece is certainly part of it. But we need to fund that trust. We need to deal with getting more units online. And we had a great presentation from the port last week at our subcommittee, in which they, the port basically told us that they're willing to work with us in identifying vacant foreclosed properties and using the land bank to help clean up some of these properties. And more to come, but please do tune in on these meetings every other Tuesday at noon. And we also would expect to be issuing an invitation to the Peaslee Center to present at one of those meetings. We're hearing from all kinds of different stakeholders in the community, from the banking community, developer community, for-profit, affordable housing developers across the board. So please engage with us in this process, and please know that this scorecard, while I understand, it's important, it is only part of the puzzle and only a piece of the work that we're really trying to undertake. There really is a group of folks on this current council, and we're here through December, who deeply care about these issues and just are trying to figure out a way to make a lasting mark in the time we have left. So thank you for what you're doing, and please hold us accountable and stay engaged.
Okay, anyone else? Questions,
Mr.
comments?
Chair.
I'm sorry?
Mr. Chair, it's Liz.
Ms. Keating? Yes.
Yeah, thank you to everyone at Peaslee for this presentation. This has been very helpful. I asked the same thing to Councilmember Landsman with his scorecard. Is it possible to get to see your rubric and evaluate the recent development projects that council has passed, just so we can get an idea of what it would look in real life situations. I think that will help with our assessment.
Can I, real quick? One thing that I wanted to be clear about, and that would be really helpful, and one reason that we are proposing the developer questionnaire, which is one piece of the total rubric, right? Which is the solid transparency information gathering. If we can all agree that that is important to do, whether that is for baseline, what in the world are we developing and at what rates, so that we know, so that we have a baseline for setting policy for the future, even if that's where you are and that's not where we are and not where, part of the challenge is that transparent information is critical to doing the evaluations. It's critical to using the rest of the rubric, and or even if not our rubric, if you were using some other guide. So that's one reason that we are, if we strongly encourage all council members to take a look at that developer questionnaire, because it allows you to run through the rubric, which is a solid set. And Jen, do you want to say anything else? Probably better than me.
Sorry, I know we're close on time. I just wanted to say that it is important to be mindful when you're trying to retroactively run projects through the rubric, that part of the rubric scoring kind of incorporates new standards and guidelines around community input. So it's highly unlikely that past projects are going to meet those, even though they are not costly for developers to do, right? So they're not going to impact the financial feasibility of a project, but developers aren't necessarily doing an extra input session when they're not being asked to. So I want to be clear, because I think the few cases we've seen where folks at the city are trying to use the rubric for the specific purpose you're asking, just that we be mindful that because a project in the past didn't necessarily get a particular score doesn't mean that project wasn't feasible given the rubric, or could not have earned that score if the rubric were in place. So I just want to, you can certainly do that. If you don't have easy access to it, let us know. Everybody should have the Peaslee rubric in their email on council, but yeah.
And we have a handful of those projects, but again, if we could, we could sit down with DCD staff for sure and go through some projects. That'd be great.
Okay, I'd like to see any other questions or comments from members of the committee. If not, we appreciate your time, and we look forward to version B and some vigorous discussions over the next couple of weeks.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Kearney?
I just wanted to thank Peaslee neighborhood as well, but I just wanted to say to Ms. Summers, I think your last suggestion about going through some as examples would be really, really helpful. So thank you for that.
Okay, yeah.
Unless there's other business, we're adjourned.
Thanks, Mr. Mann.